And we should be good to go, Ed.
All right. For those of you who are coming, thank you for joining me in the now aptly named Dave Kennedy Overflow Room, also known as Threat Intelligence Management Anonymous. So what we're going to talk about today is around threat intelligence management, specifically the processes, the steps, the technology that goes into it. Now, before I start, I do want to say that at the end of this, there's an opportunity to win a DerbyCon ticket. So who doesn't have a DerbyCon ticket? Couple? All right. So you have the opportunity, based upon today's discussion and talk, to win a DerbyCon ticket. Who would want to win one? Anybody?
Of course.
Okay. All right. So a little bit about myself. I'm an Iowa farm boy. I used to be very happy. I am a technology geek. Wife's not so happy. Very not happy over the fact that I have not gone to using a tablet yet. So I am a veteran of the Navy. Any other veterans? Military? One. Thank you for your service. I actually thought I could actually pull this mustache off. As you can tell, I don't do that anymore. I'm a big science fiction fan. Is anybody else a sci-fi fan? Who's waiting for episode 7 to come out of Star Wars? Yes. And for those of you who are wondering, I am in the picture. I'm the guy in white. And I happen to be certified with a bunch of letters that normally falls on the other side of information security. And it's detailing around the information security side from the business perspective. Now, I do have a technical background. I also have a lot of time where I like to play Scrabble. And being a geek, I do like to come up with unique things. So one of the things I sat around one night was trying to figure out, what does my certification actually spell? And lo and behold, whoa. Yeah. The mustache has returned. It will make a comeback. Ultimately, what that came out to spell is GIC-IT crimes, which, being in information security, is kind of cool, right? Find IT crimes. So how many of us have done this, where we've had our executives come in the room, and they're doing the dog and pony, and we put this up on the screen. Who's guilty of that? Yeah, we all are, right? And we like to say, this is threat intelligence. No, not really. It's pretty. It reminds me of war games, which I don't know, being the crowd that you are, if you remember that game. However, it does bring the question when it comes to threat intelligence, what it can allow us to do. So what if we had the ability to get in front of some of these things that we see on a regular basis? The malware distribution. Anybody ever deal with viruses and getting malware out of their environment? It's not fun, is it? Especially when we have systems that start beaconing out to known command and controls. Well, what if we could get out in front of that? Well, we could defend our businesses, which is kind of what we get paid for, right? Or does anybody just sit around and just collect the paycheck? We can prioritize our resources, because in information security, we tend to always have more people just sitting around waiting to do something than not, right? We can make well-informed decisions, as well as ultimately reduce the impact to the organization. So today, what we're going to talk about is how I ended up in this space. We'll take a look at what it takes to build an information or a threat intelligence program, what actually threat intelligence management is, as well as getting into some of the analysis side that goes into it, which analysis is sort of kind of critical for threat intelligence. We'll take a look at an actual case study, when we start talking about how this gets into the organization. The big thing nowadays is, anybody's management ever come back from a conference and go, we need threat intel? That management by conference never works, right? So we'll take a look at some of the case studies around actual application of threat intelligence, as well as the business value, and we'll discuss what I call the field of battle. So in the beginning, there was the internet. Al Gore said it was good, because Al Gore created the internet, right, according to everything. So we're familiar with security through obscurity, but I've gone into this next phase of saying, we're not doing that. We're just going to be basically, denying the issue. We're going to hope for the best, and we're going to have faith that the resources that we have come in. And over my expanse of my career, starting back, I started actually documenting some of the things I was hearing. Who would attack us? We're in Ohio. Okay, that's a great one because, the internet's only located in Ohio. So that made me start asking some serious questions that revolved around, whiskey, tango. We'll stop there and go back to the alcohol because that's what we need. And ultimately what ended up happening is, we've all heard the term Internet of Things, right? Anybody not familiar with that? I made the comment during a conference between two individuals, one from the business, one from the technology, and I said, oh, IoT, it actually should be IOTD, the Internet of Bad Things. And immediately was accused of promoting FUD. And anybody ever been accused of FUD? The FUD peddler, the narcissistic vulnerability pimp? Yeah, so definitely was not happy. I was rather upset because I saw a problem, but I was having a hard time understanding it. Did anybody think that internet-based attacks were not actually a threat to their organizations? Again, some of the common things that were being said. And again, being an Iowa farm boy, when I'm faced with a problem, I like to tackle it head on. However, sometimes when I would hear things like this, I would be like, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. I'm hearing this, but it's not connecting. So before we go on, let's go ahead and get in the right mindset. So two friends of mine, one of them being my partner at Rendition, have two very good, solid statements when it comes to adversarial activities against our organization. Rob Lee likes to say that we have zero influence on whether or not we're going to be targeted as an organization. Do we all agree on that? Absolutely. We cannot sit there and say that this criminal syndicate's going to choose us or not. Jake likes to go the other opposite direction and say, we get to choose one thing out of all of it, and that's where we do the field of battle. So how mature our organization is when it comes to configuration management, asset management, change management, these are critical. So ultimately, what I wound up doing when I was accused of FUD was going back to the basics. So I built one of these. And when I started this project, I swore to my wife that this was not going to be anything major. It was a pet project. It's like a bonsai tree, right? Well, unfortunately, it ended up turning into this. It got a little out of hand. And when I was running this, one of the things that I realized is that orange is not the new black when your husband is a geek, because my wife ended up seeing a lot of this, which trying to explain that, no, this is not going to be an impact. However, what I did learn is that when that happened, going here makes it all better. So I was getting the information. I deployed a number of honeypots and was pulling in information. Now, I'm one of those people that like to take the information back and take a look and see what's going on. So I could see where the attack was originating from because, IP address from China means China's doing it, right? But we can start getting into a little bit more depth and detail when we just actually start doing some analysis. So after this honeypot had come up, the first attack came in roughly 35 minutes after it first came online. But that's okay because it was coming from South Korea and they're our allies, so it's good, right? The first web attack came in from Texas, but that's okay because they're part of our states, right? So we should be good. Well, I had a colleague of mine that I was working with at the time that asked me, he goes, so why do you think these are attacks? Well, one, I'd never promoted it on a search engine, so I didn't put it out on Bing or Yahoo or that little company called Google. It wasn't part of an existing domain that I spun up a new subdomain on, so it was just out there. Again, just threw it online. Plus, I come from the business side. Who are my web app developers in here? Anybody? Anybody ever develop a website? So I like to look at logs. And even though I'm not very technical, I don't think that that's a normal command call to come in through a URL. Does that look normal to anybody? No? So what I was able to do was turn around and start painting a picture, and I apologize if you can't see it. So I started having people all over the globe that started hitting my machine, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. But what can I do with it? I want to take action on it. So I started thinking about, okay, well, I'm prior military. I have a little bit of background in the, how information is collected and gathered and used. Let's talk about developing a threat intelligence program. So what threat intel is not? It's not Google. I've had people say, well, you know, we can get information, we can throw it in Google Translator, and no, that's not the case. Again, threat intelligence in and of itself is a management program. The way we apply the information we collect is just as important as the tools we use. Realizing the difference between the two is also critical. So some common misconceptions around threat intelligence management is that it's a list of IP addresses and domains. Now, that is source information that can be used potentially, but I will tell you that if you have information that pops up and all of a sudden you're communicating with, you know, someplace in South America, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I was working with a client, financial institution, very large financial institution. Nobody could account for why there was a connection down to Colombia. So the security team, being the protectors that they are, killed the circuit at the firewall. They stopped denying traffic. And then about 30 minutes later, they got a call saying, why is our bank down in Colombia not working? Again, small gap between the security practitioners and the business. They'd actually started up new services, and now we had just impacted the business. So bad IP addresses may or may not be bad, and this plays into the necessity for conducting analysis. That you can actually buy threat intelligence. How many have had a vendor that's approached them and say, buy our threat intel? It's not threat intelligence. It's not something you can buy. You have to build it organically. They can provide you source feeds, but they cannot provide you an actual threat intelligence offering. It requires the NSA's budget. Now, I wish I had the NSA's budget. Not even that. I wish I had a fraction of their budget. What I did was turn around and take a lot of open source tools and leverage them in a position that would be able to provide me the information I need, which was cheap and inexpensive. Ultimately, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to threat intelligence. And when I say that, we've all run vulnerability assessments against our networks. Yes? No? Maybe sometimes? And they come back with these risk rankings of saying, this is high. Well, it's not a cookie cutter approach, because what a risk is to my organization is going to be different than what a risk is to yours. So again, one size doesn't necessarily fit all. Oh, and then it's only for information technology and security people. When we talk about threat intelligence, it plays right into risk management. Risk management is owned by the business. So again, you don't need the $1 million budget. It helps to have a budget defined, not mandatory. What you do need is leadership's commitment and understanding of what threat intelligence actually is. In this case, it was my wife who did not understand threat intelligence, or why I was spending all this money on doing this thing. So when we look at threat intelligence, we walk through the different processes. And that goes from planning all the way through action. And ultimately, at its core, it's a business management function. It provides a strategic advantage that allows for tactical application. We can take the information we collect and gather, and we can actually use that. So when we talk about the intelligence universe, we have data coming in from all directions. We're going to look at a little bit today is looking at the human side. We're going to look at the internet. We're going to look at our own internal systems. So we have this thing in threat intelligence called the ecosystem, new buzzword. It's comprised of all the steps and activities associated with an attacker, as well as the defender, and the process that they go through. And we'll get to this in a little bit later. So one of the key things that we have to deal with during the planning process is finding out and getting some definite answers from the business. What is it that you want to be advised of? We want to pick up on all chatter and be able to understand, okay, great, give me 3 headcount. I need one guy who speaks Farsi, another one that speaks Russian, and a guy that speaks Chinese. Getting to that point of being able to level set expectations on what the business is actually concerned about. Being able to know where you can collect information. Being able to know how valid that information is, what your confidence in that is. Because data comes from a lot of different areas. There is no lack or shortage of where we get it from. But we ultimately have to turn it into something that we need to be able to use. Has anybody ever looked at a live network packet stream, TCP dump. Do we understand that right off the bat, or do we have to decode it and turn it into something? Same thing in threat intelligence. You get a lot of raw data that we can collect. Again, the collection, when it is accessible, how available, what is the confidence in the source. Is this somebody that threw up a honeypot that's not doing any analysis whatsoever, or is somebody behind it looking at it and vetting the information? Is it relevant to your organization? If you hear about a new vulnerability that's popping and hitting Unix systems and you're a Windows shop, is that relevant to you? Probably not. Some of the areas of different types of feeds that come in, their formats, we have the automated and internet side. We can pull that down through multiple different ways, whether it's through wget, RSS feeds, pulling it down and actually getting the raw data. We can also get it through human element side of the house, where we're talking with somebody and you're sitting there talking to a colleague who may be in the same industry but not the same company, and they may share with you, hey, we're seeing these types of attacks. You can take that and leverage that as well. Again, there is no shortage of information that is available, nor the formats that it comes out in. So let's talk a little bit about analysis. One of the key areas that we're going to hit on a little bit later, more in detail. We have to analyze and normalize the data and put it into a way that we can consume it. We have to validate it, or do we trust it blindly? We want to validate it. Then we have to assess it and see what it is that we're actually looking at. Are we looking at a new ODay that's popped that we're just on the front end seeing? Or is this something that's very innocuous? Then we categorize it. We put it into a block for action later on. Is this something that's highly critical to our organization? Is it impacting sensitive information? Or is this, again, an Nmap scan against our network because we're in a financial service industry? That might happen on a regular basis. Again, when we talk about threat intelligence management, the next phase we want to talk about is production. What are we producing with the information that we collect? Well, it has to be actionable. We have to be able to do something with it. Otherwise, is it of any value? Probably not. Holistically, in view of the entire organization. Now, we tend to focus on where our corporate headquarters are. And to use a case study real quick on the Target breach, do you think that they ever for a moment thought of an HVAC vendor out of Pennsylvania when it came to assessing their security? I can tell you, based upon what happened, no, they did not. However, what it does indicate is that the attackers are. Our adversaries that are coming up against our organizations, they are thinking about those types of vectors. Has to be flexible. So ultimately what I ended up doing was building a series of platforms to use. Any of those who've ever used those easy-to-use tools that are native to Unix and Linux languages like sed, awk, grep, the ones that aren't so well documented, they allowed me to be able to take that information in, ingest it, and turn around and produce some information that I could use. Every open source project out there known to man can be leveraged in some way, shape, or form. And there is no limit to what you can leverage if you're creative and thinking. Allowed for a highly customizable environment. It's a good way of saying that, I made it do what I want. So ultimately what I ended up doing was coming across and was able to track down an application called CIF, Collective Intelligence Framework. And this allowed me to start aggregating information in, ingesting it, and then coming back and looking at it. Now, we're all fine being able to look at a command line, right? Now, put yourself in the business side. Do you think they'll understand that for a second? No. So getting creative, we created a dashboard. Now, will they be able to understand this? A lot easier than having to read a dashboard or a command line. So then I was able to pull out some additional information of bad things going on around the globe and how it impacted the organization. Again, and this differed from Norse and some of the threat maps that we see out there in that it was specific to the environment that I had structured specifically for this. So then what I ended up doing was getting a number of collection points for analysis that would allow me to turn around and produce something. So whether it was a new IP firewall or a new firewall rule set, whether it was dropping something at the boundary, I had the ability now to actually look and see and take action and find out, or prevent things from going on, which is the key thing, being able to take action with what we know. Specifically, in this case, action against bad things, or things that we had perceived as being bad. So from a technical aspect, my hardware quickly became more than what my wife thought was reasonable. Plus, has anybody else ever had to explain or justify getting a 40 amp circuit put into their house? Probably not. Not an easy sell. Again, open source platforms were used. Number one, they were free. There are a ton of them that you can choose from. They're free. They run on legacy hardware, which is great because legacy is cheaper, right? Did I mention they were free? So the entry level for a business organization is relatively low, especially when you start talking about virtualizing systems. So you can make the business case for them. Well, what that ended up resulting in is I needed to focus more on the analysis side of the house. I was getting now approximately between 960 and 1400 megabits or megabytes per hour to process, which is what spawned that again. Because as I'm pulling in this information, I'm sucking up bandwidth. Then we created a little lab to teach people how to do this on their own, which, of course, do you guys know where this is going to lead me to again? Back to Jared. So overview of this, we look at it, who's interested in us. We're able to look at some of the new attack profiles. I got to watch that speaker. We can start seeing malicious things happen. Also, I could start planning mitigation tactics. I could start planning to do things with what I collected. Again, updating, identifying malware quickly. These are all types of things that we can now do based upon the information that we collected and aggregated. And of course, for the business folks, being able to draw maps and dashboards, that's like critical. Same reason why we put up the Norse map when the executives walk in the room, because it looks important. So let's dive into a little bit of the analysis. So, saw a number of the systems that were getting hit by honeypots. And if you've ever seen and pulled information out, we can see this. And this is from a very short snapshot, but we can see that they're trying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, admin and root, admin, to get in. Which is, we were able to pull that back and tie it to a couple of platforms to see exactly what they might be looking for. So we were seeing brute force attacks occur against privileged accounts, which default credentials, they are going to be used in attacks. But does that buy us any additional information? Well, let's actually get into something that's not root, something that's different, something that may create some additional information for us. So from some of the information we were able to collect, we were able to see that support belongs to US Robotics. Well, that's interesting. I don't run any USR. This was interesting. Machine hypervisors, interesting cloud-based system. The next interesting one, I'd never seen this before until I started looking up. Somebody was looking specifically for Polycom servers that might be connected to the internet. Well, what are Polycom systems used for? Anybody?
Telephones.
Telephones. Communications. Why might somebody be interested in what we're talking about?
Because I can listen in on your traffic.
There you go. So pulled some information. I had an outlier right here that was not like the rest, but hey, in true Mandiant fashion, I'm going to pull up a map and see where that goes. However, when I started analyzing some of the information around it, collecting of the agent strings and analyzing it, started showing some additional information that we could use to better protect ourselves. start seeing actually what they were using. I didn't even realize that there was an SSH library for .NET. Not only that, but that somebody actually coded a way to brute force with it. So it was like, ooh, okay. This one was really interesting because when I saw that one, I was like, okay, there were 6 attempts over the time span. This is rather interesting. Until I came across that article that explained that there was a vulnerability associated with it. And I was like, okay, so we probably have a victim's machine that's being used to pivot and go out to other areas. So, being in the industry for as long as we have, we tend to see that some of the information that comes back, we can automatically tell and say, this is a botnet attack. We can look at the patterns here. We see the escalation in information. We see common threads. However, having to explain to the business why this is a botnet, well, we took this information and time seriesed it. So where we have a 1, and this is over a 1-minute period. So we see a number of login attempts being made over a single minute, which if you ever tried to enter your password in, if you have to do it 38 times that we see here, is that humanly possible? So we can probably say that this IP address is probably part of a bot network.
Ed, if I may please interrupt you, is there any way possible that this could be a Tor auto roll, meaning they just keep switching Tor servers on a randomized basis?
Their IP address doesn't change.
For Tor?
No, for this one specifically.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, sir.
So one of the things I found out was these folks liked putty, and it actually was tied back to the Tuwan College. Guess where? China. However, anybody use putty? Anybody download putty recently? From the legit site? They make putty available in multiple languages to include Chinese. Yet we see here, when we cross-referenced it, that's all the English Standard Language. Now, if you're attacking a foreign national, are you going to program in your language or another language?
Program in my language and then pipe your proxy events to another country.
So does this necessarily mean that that's who my adversary actually is? No. Judging by the fact that they are a college, and we know that academic institutions love to spend money to protect their systems, right? Exactly. So why analysis is important. So this I got from a colleague of mine, and I want you guys to watch this real quick and tell me what you can pick up on. Is anybody unfamiliar with the commands that are being issued?
No. Why is it repeating that same command out?
You want to make sure that it's executable, right? So to keep in mind, this is a Kippo honeypot, which allows somebody to brute force the root account and gain access. It's also a type of jailed environment that creates a mock pseudo world, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to run all the commands, but it gives the presence like you are actually in there.
So it's like a shrew?
Something like that. Has anybody picked up on it yet?
It's not checking the permissions that it's trying to set.
Is this a botnet script, or is it a person? It's a person. So when you see something like this actually happen live, it's like full restraint to keep from breaking in on the session and talking with them. Because it's like, you need to realize you're in a honeypot. And I wanted to be like, hey, you're going to make a presentation out of this. So we saw initially that a script was being downloaded at the very beginning. Now, this was the funny part, because you never want to assume that the adversary or the attacker is coming in from their world. They're probably going to bounce out. They're going to pivot through somebody else. So I don't want to assume that this is the domain. So we went ahead and grabbed the domain, and we see that there's another, or the script. We see that there's another script that's being called, so we went ahead and grabbed that as well. Now, this, and I did not make this up, for the love of God. So this could be a false flag, because if I'm trying to do something, I don't want attention brought to me. So I was like, okay, this can't really be this easy. You know, I've got a lot of information in here, and let's take a look. And I'm pulling excerpts out. So the first site that I had pulled was the Bsides site, Bsides.com, which redirected me. Which this is one of the things I cracked up on when I got this. System space 32.exe failure. Now, first of all, can anybody tell me what OS I'm running? Mac. But yet my system 32 exe has failed. Ooh.
You better run it.
Better call.
Exactly. I so wanted to call them, and I was like, no, I don't have enough time to do that.
Would made a good recording.
I'm sure it would. In fact, don't give me ideas. My wife will hate you for the end of time. So we started pulling up some information, and lo and behold, the individual we had identified that left their information in the scripts actually existed. And I was like, oh, this cannot get any better. So let's start taking a look at some information. He runs a YouTube channel, and I was like, oh, okay, not a lot of subscribers, but hey, he's got followers. So I started, start off with the basics. When, oh my goodness, look, same name, same guy. This could not be that simple, right? Oh, okay, find out, okay, he's out of Singapore, not a problem. Started pulling out some information. This is the company that they actually run. And we started looking at some information, what they do. They provide drop-bear, VPN, virtual private services, and I'm like, this cannot get any better. Oh no, it gets better.
Did you query the HTTP keys?
Not yet.
Okay.
So found out he also owns another domain. Again, he's got the Huthos. So I'm actually the person who's doing this is actually maybe the actual attacker. So let's check Facebook, and yep. So now I have an actual, now I can do the entire Mandiant report, APT1, I track the attacker back to Singapore. I'm halfway tempted to email the guy now that I know all the information and say, hey, can I have you at a talk? I need you to come to the US.
After this video is uploaded, you should take that and put it under one of his videos as like a video response.
Pay for his passport.
That-
You're going to be my whipping boy.
So, so let's talk about, the business value that we can bring, and I'll try to keep it a little light. So the threats that we face are stymied by the fact that we are competing against this. The Hollywood romanticized hackers. This is what our executives, this is what our business leadership sees. They see this, and this is who they think is after us, the 16-year-old in our basement. And we're having to overcome that. We're having to get through there. Now, if any of your execs think the Matrix is what they're, yeah. Duracell batteries. So, ultimately, this is part of what we're having to overcome. So, and of course, I can't, no security conference would be complete without mention of Black Hat. So I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, which means I'm old. I have never been able to find, and the quality's not good, that the actual to-do script for the malware is actually that easy to find. In 25 years, I have never had a nuclear reactor explode. Never had to chase anybody down the streets in a foreign country, although after finding out he's in Singapore, that may be a possibility now. Nor have I had to ever draw down on somebody for perpetuating an attack. In fact, this is the common thread that we usually get lumped in. We're over the laptop, we're wearing, working with our hoodie over our head.
That's such a shame.
It is. However, thanks to Black Hat, now this is what we have the chance to be. Which my wife would be really happy if I looked that good. So now I'm blending the two. So why threat intelligence now? Why is it becoming a thing? Well, being able to leverage actionable intelligence can prevent larger impacts. If we can stop a known C2 from being able to, or our systems to be able to access a known C2, those systems may get infected, but they can't exfiltrate information. We have a responsibility to protect our organizations. The threats are real, and helping educate our staff on this is important. We can proactively defend ourselves. How many of us are used to reactive organizations where, it's one fire to the next, to the next, to the next? That gets old and we burn out really quick.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All right, so your reaction, how does it proactively separate that segment of infected material, and not only separate, but learn from it and pass that on to the rest of the hosts in the network to watch out for those values?
Hit me up and we can talk about that after. That's a very detailed question.
All right, thank you, sir.
That's not one that I can say yes or no to right away.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We can also change the way we operate. Hey, this isn't working. Antivirus doesn't catch it anymore. Or pardon me, what is it now? Endpoint security is the new thing?
Lame shit that doesn't work.
So ultimately, we can take this information and become a business enabler. We can identify some common information. We can identify whether or not we're being targeted by a criminal syndicate, a nation state, hacktivist organization. We can identify some information about where they're coming from. We can develop a profile. We can be able to answer how they're going to come after me. We know that this organization uses spear phishing from these domains. We can get out in front of it. We can overall, from an IT operations and security operations perspective, get out in front and enhance the operational capabilities for our organizations. Or what I like to say is, hug the life out of the attack cycle. So when we talk about the field of battle, what we're focusing in on when it comes to this period is the sooner we can catch an adversary doing something, and the sooner we can block them and thwart them, the less impact it's going to have to our organization. Everybody know what this is? The cult of Clopper? The cyber kill chain, which runs through the stages that an adversary has to take in order to compromise a network. Their ultimate end state goal is to exfiltrate information. Whether that information is being used to herd other botnets within the organization or being used to mine Bitcoin. They're going to want to get some type of information out. It may be your intellectual property. It may be credit card information, patient health information. So when we look at it, we can disrupt them. We really can't control reconnaissance or weaponization of that. What we can have some capability is around whether or not we disrupt their delivery. If we identify known spam locations, known phishing attacks, and put those in and block them in, before they get to us, we've already disrupted that. We have to make them change their tactics and their approach that they take when attacking us. When it comes to exploitation, this is where things like change management, configuration standards, and solid patching cycles is critical. Again, another method to disrupt. Command and control, being able to get that information and put it in. Again, if a system gets infected, we can turn around and prevent it from calling back and beaconing out. And then getting to the exfiltration portion. How do we do that? Well, we monitor our networks.
An active network monitoring sucks in today's state. What if in this attack model, it never reaches to exploitation in your standards? Let's say at the weaponization stage, it's already exfiltrating data vicariously.
You cannot logically go beyond that, because if it's not been weaponized, you can't utilize it. An attacker or an adversary can't use it.
In the same note, it can be weaponized, delivered, and exfiltrated all in the same.
That's a process, not the life cycle. So a little bit different thought.
Okay.
So ultimately and ideally, this is where we want to try and disrupt as much as possible. Before they can deliver it, if they are successful in delivery, how do we disrupt them from an exploitation standpoint?
Ingress and egress filters.
This, failing to prevent the attack in the earlier stages, this is where we're left to work at, and this is when things go bad. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at this, if we've made it to this stage, it's going to be a bad day all around. So things to disrupt successful delivery, again, getting out and getting those information, educating our endpoint or our end users, being able to reverse known bad malware, because a lot of times the attackers will use commodity malware and they will reuse what they have. Antivirus is not the answer. However, knowing your assets and your applications and how and who they're talking to is important. If we know what the applications are talking to, we have the logs coming in that we're able to review, we're able to get out in front of these things and stop exploitation from happening. Or at least be alerted early on that we can take proactive measures and raise the fire alarm. When it comes to command and control, the only thing that at that point that we're going to have to rely on is the ability for continuous monitoring and our incident response capabilities. How many of you have very well-defined practices and procedures and a playbook in the event of an incident? If something bad happens, do you know what you're able to do?
I got one click.
So other areas that we can do is sinkhole and black hole those DNS entries of known bad and reduce that chatter. Again, exfiltration, are we going to know what's actually leaving our network? Are we monitoring our network on a regular basis? Do we know what good is on our network? Have we baselined it? Do we know who we're talking to? Or are we going to accidentally shut down a bank in Colombia because nobody told us about it?
Do you do further inspection on the payload data itself, to where if they had already seen your traffic and how your traffic flowed, they were routing through and then vicariously exfiltrating out of another host?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm very lucky that I work with one of the top SANS instructors, a gentleman by the name of Malware Jake, who that's what he lives and dies. He dissects malware. So we're able to catalog that information and then reference it later on to see if this is something new, if it's a variation, or if it's somebody that's got a script and able to run it. So the cost of failure, the good news is usually on this part, there's really no cost to us as an organization. When we start getting into the exploitation, that's when the money starts racking up. When we get into exfiltration, this is when your fine penalties, litigation start. This is when things get really bad, and you're going to see this guy. You're either going to be asking him for a loan, or he's going to be there to tell you that you are fired. So when it comes to threat intelligence, what are some of the common obstacles that we have to overcome? Well, number one is capitalism. As we're seeing right now, every vendor in the space, even those that you would never think were in the industry, are now offering a threat intelligence feed because people want to make money on it. Our legal and general counsel, it's really interesting to see their perspective, because if we identify malware beaconing out to an organization that's not ours, we might have to report that we've been breached. So they don't really want to know that. Also, as an organization, we don't want to be perceived as being weak. Because if we have to disclose that, hey, we've been breached, are we weak? No, we just don't have the resources that we need. Are we disclosing too much information? Well, do we lack the supporting infrastructure? Do we have the tools, the skills, the resources we need? Most importantly, do we have the support and commitment of leadership? Or did they come back from a conference and say, we need threat intelligence? Another thing is knowing your environment, knowing who you're communicating with, what information is transferring, how that information is. Are we like the OPM where everything's unencrypted and we're just transferring data back and forth? Or is everything encrypted? Is it commensurate? Is it being protected commensurate with the impact it can have to the organization? Because this looks nice, and vendors come in and they're like, oh, look at, buy our threat intelligence. The one thing I would challenge you all to do is if you get into that situation where they want you to buy the threat intelligence, ask one question and one question of them, and see if they can answer it. Why is it a threat to me? So my contact information, and I did tell everybody at the beginning that there would be a giveaway. So here's my contact information using open, and here's the challenge. I have a free DerbyCon ticket for anybody who can get this information and send it to me. First one in.
Is it cheating if I answer?
Yes.
Oh,
And with that, I'll open the floor to any additional questions.
So, looking at the threat intelligence, things that are out there already as far as Python, like Threat Aggregator, Combine, things like that, or Threat IQ, are you using any of those
Yes.
now?
Yes.
And then, so what are your formats you're trying? I see, like you put them in XML, things like that. But is there any like Sticks Taxi, CEF format that you're trying to get into, and like what are some of the ways that you've got around that hurdle?
So to answer that question, the first thing I always do is I define the problem. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then I put it in the format that's going to work best. If it's just me dealing with it, I can read a command line and I'm fine. If I'm working with business leadership, I might use something like, do you guys know Harbor Master? You follow him on Twitter? He made a great little thing called IP Pew Pew. And it's a threat map. The fun part is you can actually structure that to your organization based upon what your organization is seeing from the logs and information. And now instead of having to throw up the Norse map,
Right.
you can show in context of your business with sound effects that actually is able to demonstrate, this is what we're seeing on a regular basis. This is how we're being attacked. Ultimately, though, it's going to be based upon the audience. Ingesting that information, you're going to have the information provided differently to somebody who's a firewall administrator versus somebody who's an IDS administrator versus somebody who's in the C-suite looking at you going, where is my money going?
That dashboard you showed, was that Kibana, Elasticsearch?
Yes, that's the elk stack.
And then for, I guess, provide the best detection, because if you're collecting all the data, that's one thing, but actually analyzing that in real time or near real time, is the SIM the best approach for correlation, or are there better approaches?
So for correlation in events like that, there's another talk that I do called The Answer is 42 that talks specifically about that. It can leverage a lot of the same technologies, capabilities, processes. It's just, yes, I'm big on analysis. I want to see what's going on. I want to be able to run it through and balance that information based upon that.
If in that initial inspection stage, are you going to go ahead and execute this information that's obviously arbitrary prior, and then alert the rest of the nodes on the network of any intrusive behaviors that could be defined in any said payload that could be defined in the initial process?
So to answer the question, it all depends upon the business needs. For example, if I see suspicious activity coming off of my transaction processing switch, if I'm a payment processor, and I suspect that it's been compromised and I'm seeing traffic go someplace else, am I going to take that system offline and start doing analysis?
I'm not saying taking it offline, I'm saying doing an immediate deep dive of the packet payload to find out more intelligence over what it's doing, what it's either trying to exfiltrate or process as a command in your network.
I'm going to look at it and see what it's doing. And one of the reasons why analysis is so important, because you can get a piece of malware. For example, if you're a payment processor and you get a piece of malicious software in your environment that you've identified that this is bad, you might have to report a breach, especially if it's exfiltrating credit card information. However, at the same token, if you're able to reverse engineer and take a look at it and find out that it's part of a larger botnet that's sending out spam relay or is acting as a spam relay, Would you have to disclose that? General counsel will weigh in and probably give you the best advice. If no credit card's being disclosed, you may get a pass.
Any recommendations for, I guess, tuning out some of the noise?
Time. The key part that a lot of our organizations that we work with is that we inherit the network from somebody else. And we're really great as an industry documenting our network infrastructure and who we're talking with. So it's going to take some time, and that's one of the things to convey to management is that, hey, listen, this is going to take some time to get them to understand and find out what good is. I've worked with some organizations that have been like, hey, we've got $800,000 to buy this feed from vendor X. And my recommendation to them is, no, don't buy that feed. Get some resources, get some human capital, get some analysts. I would rather take that $800,000 investment instead of an annual cost for a source feed from somebody, put that into bodies that knows my environment, that understands my business, and can find bad on their own.
Can you go to the previous slide?
I have the skills and capabilities.
Thank you.
So, the question I've got, and it seems like there's clearly two dynamics that are in tension, of course. One being the immediacy of analysis, the other being the sort of depth of analysis, right? Like tracking that over time. How are you balancing that out? Like in your own thinking, how do you tend to balance that?
So I'm a workaholic, so that's not a fair question to ask. Because there have been many nights that I've started like working on analysis of something like on 3 o'clock on Friday, and then the next thing I know, my wife's saying, hey, it's 7 a.m., you need to take the boys to school, and I'm like, but it's Friday, and she's like, no, it's Monday.
Yeah.
You have to find that balance, and keep in mind that when you build a threat intelligence management program, you're going to have a manager, you're going to have reverse engineers, you're going to have analysts, and they're going to focus on their areas. So, a new collection effort has yielded, we found these binaries on our system that are bad. So immediately we know we can start hashing those to go out and start looking for other badness. We hand that off to the reverse engineers who are able to sit there and tell us what it actually does. Then we can start making some more well-informed decisions about what is it that we're going to do. But yes, it's always one of those things of what does it do and how do we respond. So I've got 4 minutes before the next speaker, so I'm going to have to turn this off. Thank you all for coming. Especially opposite